All right. Well, welcome everyone. On behalf of the National Child Passenger Safety Board, thank you for joining us for the CEU webinar, Manufacturers and Recalls, What Actually Happens. Today's speaker is National Child Passenger Safety Board's Community Engagement Representative and Newell Brand's Senior Compliance Engineer, James Fitzpatrick. I'm Brittany Lombard. I'm the Child Passenger Safety Advocate on the National Child Passenger Safety Board. We do have planned time to answer questions at the end of the presentation, so please enter your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you. As a reminder, attendees are requested to not participate in this webinar if you are operating a motor vehicle. The webinar will be recorded and you can listen to the recording when you safely arrive at your destination. The recording will be posted to carseateducation.org within 1 to 2 business days. For the child passenger safety technicians in attendance, this presentation qualifies for one continuing education unit or CEU. Attendance on this webinar is required for at least 45 minutes for the CEU credit. Proof of attendance will be emailed 24 hours after the webinar. When entering the CEU into your Safe Kids profile, this is a webinar teleconference, and all required information will be found on the proof of attendance email. Please join me in welcoming James.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Technology is such a wonderful thing. Are we able to see the presentation now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're joining us from today. Very happy to have you with us. So this presentation, Manufacturers and Recalls, What Actually Happens, was created by the Manufacturers Alliance for Child Passenger Safety. It was done with myself. Big shout out to my good buddy Bob Wall, along with Sarah Haverstick, for some significant input on this and putting this all together. Tongue in cheek, the original name of this presentation was going to be Manufacturers and Recalls and What We Aren't Hiding, because we do get a lot of questions from technicians and there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think that there is tons of communication between manufacturers and NHTSA and other government regulatory bodies. We want to ensure that people understand that there are a lot of reporting obligations in place. There's a lot of things that happen, and we want to make sure that everybody understands this. So we'll go through this stuff today. MACPS, so you can see here the member companies most recently updated. So this is the group of us who work together to create these presentations, CEUs, and other things as well. Show friends there today. So our of that particular legislation, review the market surveillance conducted. Review the market surveillance conducted by NHTSA and car seat manufacturers, discuss the recall process and examples of recall notifications. So I'll give you a little bit of background to get started. Many of you may remember this particular one if you're as old as I am. Some of you are probably not even close to born when all this happened. And it ages us, but this is where we start, so we go back to it. So Firestone and Ford were placing the blame kind of on each other for some tire issues that were coming up. There was a big fight about it. Congress got involved. They were drilling Ford, and NHTSA got involved to say something had to happen. And there was a very large recall of Firestone tires. So the manufacturer recalled over 6.5 million SUV vehicle tires that were cited in fatal accidents. From this, the TREAD Act was born. Now, the TREAD is a play on words, obviously, tire tread. So they really had to stretch to make this the Transportation Recall Enhancement, Accountability, and Documentation Act. You don't need to know that. TREAD Act works just fine. This was enabled way back in November of 2000. So this is the direct consequence of vehicle safety issues from the Firestone Ford investigation, which we will discuss more as we go along today. It applies to vehicles and equipment manufacturers, so that's where we as car seat manufacturers get lumped in to reporting under the TREAD Act. Some good stuff did come out of this as far as child restraints came, and that is there was the development of latch, and there were also additional labeling requirements that came into place because of the TREAD Act. So as far as us as child restraint manufacturers, there was some labeling to improve consumer understanding. Now, depending who you speak to when you look at labels on car seats, you may or may not agree that they're easy to read, but there was some focus in place to make sure that information is more legible, that you can see it, that it's more clear in a lot of ways. Latch requirements came to be for child restraint and vehicle manufacturers. So this all came from the Tread Act. NHTSA 5-star ease of use ratings were also born from this, along with what's known as the early warning reporting system, which we'll definitely discuss more here today. So let's start off by talking a little bit about market surveillance and what NHTSA does. And we're going to tie this all together with how we all go about this together. So there are a couple of different divisions of NHTSA. So the first we're going to discuss is the Office of Vehicle Safety and Compliance. So NHTSA tests not only vehicles, but also equipment. And again, that could fall into tires, that could fall into, for our specific audience here today, child car seats. And they test what's available for consumers on the market to ensure that it meets the applicable federal motor vehicle safety standards. They do this by purchasing either vehicles or equipment from dealers and retailers. They may go to manufacturers in some cases and ask for them. For the most part, they try to go and buy stuff off shelf because they don't want to have any potential of, did somebody play around with a sample that was provided? Was this different from what's actually available to the public? So we try to make it as much as possible the samples being tested are what you would see on stores and available to the public. The good thing about this is that all of these reports, all the testing is public record. So you can go online and actually find this stuff. So the link up in the top right-hand corner, we'll leave it up there for just a second. You can go on to the NHTSA Compliance Test Report database. When we go in there, if you want to click on the car seat section, we can go in and take a look at some stuff. So when you click on there, this is the page it's going to bring you to. So you can search for compliance test reports. You can search by brand, you can search by model, you can search by program year. You can put as much or as little information as you want in there. So if you wanted to search just one particular brand and see what recalls come up, you can certainly do that. So today, because Bob helped with this, we're going to pick on my friend Bob and we're going to use Nuna as our first example. So we're going to search Nuna as the manufacturer, program year 2019, and crash tests. So what comes up here? There were two results that came up from that particular program year. So 2 test reports had been run that year. You can go over onto the PDF document, click on that report, and it'll bring up the next part for you, which will tell you if there were any issues with that particular report. Now, when you go through these reports, it's important to note that this is not just the crash testing. They're also looking at instructions. They're looking at labels. They're looking at all the different components of FMVSS. So all of these different things are tested and reported. For this particular one, there was one failure noted, and that had to do with the instructions that were missing some information. So if you noticed here, the provided website for registration is not valid and does not match the website provided on the registration card and label. What happened to this? This was not a recall. Why? Because the information was available, consumers could get there, it just didn't match. So this was given to Nuna as it was a failure, not a recall, but something that they had to action, to remedy, to make sure that going forward, the information would match on all the different locations. When we go over to our friends at the Office of Defect Investigation, so these are the guys who now go into and investigate potential vehicle or equipment defects. These can reach them in a couple of different ways. It can come from consumer complaints. It could come from technicians, instructors in the field who've submitted a potential defect investigation request. It can also come from manufacturers. So yes, we do tell on ourselves too. And we'll talk more about the manufacturer's reports in a couple of minutes. So the Office of Defect Investigation, there's a couple of different phases. So the PE, or preliminary evaluation, is the first phase of the investigation. Options here are, this may be upgraded depending on what they find to an engineering analysis, which means they need to dig a little deeper and find some more information or do additional testing to see if there's an issue or not. They may just look at this and say, this is cut and dry, we're going to initiate a recall. Or they may look at it and say, this is really not an issue, this is more of a consumer satisfaction or something along those lines, and the investigation may be closed. As we go through today and show you guys more examples, you'll see that there are a lot of defect reports submitted, and there are very few recalls that are actionable because many times what is actually submitted is not a defect of the product or a safety concern. It's actually a consumer use or misuse of the product in a lot of cases. If the information submitted through the preliminary evaluation warrants so, they will upgrade to the engineering analysis. So this is the second and final phase of the NHTSA investigation. Safety recall may be initiated or the investigation closed. So once you get to this, there's really only two paths that are going to exist. Either there will be a recall, or once further testing is conducted, they will decide that there's nothing warranted and the investigation would be closed at that particular time. The Office of Defect Investigation, NHTSA monitors recalls to ensure that the scope, completion rate, and remedy are adequate. So by recall queries, or as they're known, so the information has to be provided back to NHTSA to ensure that this stuff is actually being followed up on and happening. Defect or recall petition, NHTSA may be petitioned to investigate an alleged safety defect or whether a manufacturer has successfully carried out the requirements of a recall. So once it's actually said that a manufacturer has to do a recall, they actually have to do it and go through all these steps to make sure that things are the way they're supposed to be and things are followed through on. And there are consequences if they're not, which we will definitely get into shortly. So complaints can be filed, as we said, by just about anybody. So consumers who experience a vehicle issue that could be a safety defect, everyone is encouraged to file a complaint with NHTSA. This is where we take a momentary pause and also state that if you are filing a complaint with NHTSA, as manufacturers, we ask you to do the same thing through our consumer care lines. For the simple reason that the volume of complaints that NHTSA gets is extraordinary, and you're dealing with multiple categories. So you're dealing with vehicle complaints, tire complaints, car seat complaints, where the particular manufacturer you're reaching out to has a focus on that particular product. It's really important to note that manufacturers are required to report to NHTSA, which we will get into shortly, all the information that we get from consumers. So if you do file a complaint with our database, it's not a matter of it's ignored, everything is looked into because it has to be. And you will get typically action a lot quicker than you will by filing complaints with NHTSA. So if you go on the NHTSA website and you do want to file a complaint or a safety concern, you can do so by clicking up in the right-hand corner as you see here, report a safety problem. It'll take you over to the next page, which will ask you what type of problem do you want to report? Is this vehicle? Is it related to a child car seat? Is it a tire or other vehicle related equipment or products? So for this one, we're going to click on child car seat and we go to the child car seat complaint form. So any documentation and information you can provide at this point is extremely helpful. If you are going to file a complaint with NHTSA or your manufacturer about a specific car seat, there's really important information that has to be part of this to ensure that we're getting to the root of the problem if there is one. If we're looking at child car seats, we need to make sure that you have the manufacturer and the make along with the model. Really important, even though it says optional here, is the date of manufacturing. And as we get a little further on, we'll understand that the date of manufacturing is really key because things can happen at specific times in production factories, and we want to be able to get down to the root cause of the problem. If you're reporting about vehicle type related concerns, having your vehicle identification number is going to be required for this as well. Now, if we want to go back and check historically what's available out there, you can check for recalls also by going to the NHTSA website, check for recalls, and you can search again by vehicles, car seats, tires, other equipment to see recalls that have been initiated, ongoing investigations, complaints, and even manufacturer communication. So in this case, Sarah decided to throw herself under the bus, so she's going to punch even flow in here under car seats. And we're going to pull up a number of different issues. So we see here that there were, on the top line, even flow 264 Triumph. There were 2 recalls. There was 1 investigation, and there were 71 complaints. So if you notice, 71 complaints led to 1 investigation, and there were 2 recalls from this particular product. So how do we view the records? We're going to go along. We're going to click on the number, which is the 2 recalls here. That will pull up what were the 2 recalls that were actually initiated and out available to the public. So back in 2002, there was some slide loop connectors that were an issue. In 2007, cloth cover choking hazard. So if we want some more information on that particular recall, you can click on the little plus sign there, and it's going to bring up the entire data available for what was this particular recall. So in this case, here the remedy where the red arrow is here, Evenflow will send written notification about the recall to each registered owner of the affected units and offer a free kit to cover the foam liner. So there was some picking hazard here where children could potentially choke on it. So that way there's action taken by the manufacturer. You can also go down to the bottom. You can look at affected products. There were associated documents. So if there's additional information or if the manufacturer has provided updates to NHTSA along the way, all of that is provided as well. And is again, all public record, so it can be seen here. When we go back out to the initial line that we started at, if we click on the investigations, we can see where this one started from. So the choking on the child seat styrofoam. So this one was a recall, or pardon me, an investigation that was open. Since 2003, the Office of Defect Investigation had received 12 complaints of a choking hazard. So that action was taken. Again, 12 complaints before the action was taken. So it's really important. Contact your manufacturers so they're aware of this also. This information doesn't get to manufacturers as quickly through NHTSA as it does if you contact the manufacturer directly for them to be able to review what is the issue provided. Now, if we go all the way back out again, we click on these 71 complaints. We can go through all the different ones that were submitted, and we can look at stuff like this. This was one where the fabric could be pulled up, child loosened the foam and put in the mouth. So that was one that led to this particular recall way back in 2005. Does it seem like a lot of complaints? 71 seems like a lot, but it's really not. There's a lot of car seats that are manufactured. And what we have to remember is that numerous complaints will be things like this, which are consumer satisfaction issues, more so than something that we could potentially take action on. For all the car seat techs out there, this is probably your favorite line on any warning label at the current time, which is use only in a rear-facing position when using it with an infant weighing less than 10 kilograms or 22 pounds. Now, every manufacturer's brand team, every car seat tech instructor would love to change the wording on this label, and we can't. For the simple reason that is regulated wording, that is the way it has to be written on the label, so there's no choice. So even though there was a complaint filed with NHTSA about this and how it's confusing and they don't like it, as much as we understand what you're saying and maybe even agree with you in some cases, there's nothing that we or NHTSA could do because this is pulled directly from the regulation. So it has to be the wording that you see highlighted here on the screen. So whether we agree with you or not, whether we like it or not, sometimes there's just things that we cannot change. But these complaints can also be compiled by your manufacturers, by NHTSA, for future regulatory work, which is what we're seeing in some of the updates that are coming soon. Now, what about the manufacturers? So we know that NHTSA is out there doing their due diligence, doing testing on product. Manufacturers do the same thing. So manufacturers, as far as market surveillance goes, every manufacturer tests their products at least yearly, some multiple times throughout the year. Crash testing is imperfect, and I say that as nicely as I can. Crash tests are designed to be repeatable. That is the purpose of them. So if I crash test a car seat today and I crash test the same car seat 6 months from now, I should see very, very similar results because of the way that the bench is set up, because of the way that we've taken out some of the factors like retractors, like buckles. All of those things don't exist on a test bench because we need everything to be very specific and move in certain ways. And that way it makes it more repeatable. All manufacturers will go through this, as we said, at least annually and many times multiple times throughout the year, testing products that exist on market to make sure that you're seeing similar results. The reasons that this is done are quite simple. It's that we want to ensure that when NHTSA tests the products, that they're going to see the same thing that we saw when this product was launched or last year or the year before. So we should see pretty similar results. Things can happen in production. So things can change, whether it's personnel changes, human error, sometimes material changes that manufacturers aren't always made aware of at the time. So this is why the testing continues to make sure that it meets the specific specifications that make the product safe. All of these factors go into ensuring that what we put on market is still a safe product and still meets the rigorous standards that every manufacturer tests their product to. Any manufacturer who puts product on market wants to ensure that this is a safe product. All of my manufacturer friends out there want to ensure that the products they put out on market are safe and reliable. So they continually test and test and test to make sure that we're seeing the same results over and over again. Some manufacturers have their own facilities that this testing is done at. Many times the testing will be done at third-party labs. It's always interesting and good to note at this point as well that when NHTSA tests their products, they do not test them at their own lab. They go to third-party labs and they have contracts with those labs to test the products. So manufacturers will often go to the same lab to ensure that, hey, I want to know exactly what they're seeing on the same bench, same configuration with the same people setting it up, because all of these different things can be factors in the test result at the end of the day. So TREAD Act reporting requirements is one thing that also came in. Manufacturers have to report a number of things, which we'll talk about, and identify trends or patterns that may be safety related. So our early warning reporting requirements you can see on this list here. So light vehicles, medium or heavy duty vehicles, motorcycles, trailers, tires, and of course, child restraint systems. Everybody has specific things that have to be reported on. So for us, we have to look at external communications, foreign recalls or campaigns. That one tends to surprise some people. Production, fatality claims and notices, injury claims and notices. We do not have to report on number of property or damage claims. Thank you very much, NHTSA, for giving us a break on that one. Number of consumer complaints, warranty claims, field reports, and non-dealer field reports. So if you look at this particular section here, every quarter, manufacturers have to provide to NHTSA number of units that were produced within that time period. Within 30 days of the end of the quarter. And trust me, if they don't have the report in time, you hear about it. Fatality claims and notices, injury claims and notices, number of complaints, number of field reports. So all of this information has to be submitted to NHTSA. So when we mentioned earlier on today that your best bet to get a quick resolution is to report to your manufacturer, and that's not to discourage anyone from reporting to NHTSA at the same time, we're just asking that you do both. Make sure that you're contacting your manufacturer as well. Because at the end of the day, the information is going to go from the manufacturer to NHTSA anyway, because it's legally required to do so. It has to happen quarterly in a report. So a couple of different things with external communication reporting. So notices, bulletins, customer satisfaction, campaigns, consumer advisories referring to defect, failure, or malfunction, failure of performance, or unintended deviation from design specs. So any of these things that are reported to us that are found, we have to report on. Important to note that not every customer service interaction is reportable, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We are required to report even if sent to more than one consumer and sent within 5 days of the end of the month on which it is sent. So early warning reporting requirements and what to report. This is the one that I think trips people up and surprises them more than others, is that safety recalls or safety campaigns conducted in other countries. So if we do a recall on a product in another country other than the United States, we are required to report it if it's a similar product to what's available on market here. Similar is a very broad description of it. So by default, just to cover our butts, we tend to make sure that if we're conducting a recall in another country, we're going to at least provide information about it to NHTSA so they're aware of it. That may or may not lead to action being taken by NHTSA. As we know, regulations are different in different countries, products can look different, but if it's similar, then we are going to report it to NHTSA so they are aware of it. So some of our early reporting requirements are the number of units produced, consumer complaints, how many warranty claims, field reports, and deaths or injuries. So when we look at consumer complaints, we have to file these quarterly to NHTSA. And this is going to be for child restraint manufactured in previous 4 years, including products that are no longer in production. So even if we're not producing it any longer and we're getting a complaint on it because the seed is not expired and it's still in use, we have to provide that information to NHTSA. Child restraint production, so some of the stuff that we need to provide to them is the manufacturer name, obviously, model name, production year, what type of restraint it is, and report the total number of units produced. And that goes for everything that we produce. So for manufacturers like Graco that have very specific names for all your seats out there, it's a big list. It's a very long list, and I feel sorry for the people at NHTSA who have to read that long list trying to decide what snug ride, snug fit, snug whatever it is that particular day we're actually reporting on. Consumer complaints. So when we look at these, customer service reporting. All of the consumer care or customer care teams are trained certainly to identify specific buzzwords, for example, but also to understand that if things sound like a safety issue, this gets escalated quite quickly within organizations. So this will roll up to our quality teams, to our different engineering teams to make sure that we're looking at this and seeing, is this something that's an actual issue? Was this a misuse? Was there a modification to the seat in some way that could have caused this? All of these things are looked at. Customer service spreadsheets. So we're going to look at aggregate numbers. We're going to look at whether or not the reports were substantiated. A lot of people, unfortunately, will call in because they're upset about something, or they will provide some information, but they won't follow up with additional questions or things that we've asked. Whether that may be, look, we'd love to look at the product. We need to get it back. The manufacturer is going to pay to have this shipped back. We're going to give you a prepaid shipping label. Not everybody follows through on those things, so we can't actually substantiate it. However, it was reported, so we're going to submit it with it being not substantiated. When we look at the number of consumer complaints, so a consumer complaint need not be reported when the complaint fails to identify the child restraint with minimal specificity, or the system or component allegedly involved is not one of the systems or components specified in the component codes. So if we look at our different codes here, we look at the different pieces. If they're talking about something that doesn't match, or they're not giving us enough information, or we can't verify what it is that they're trying to tell us, despite our best efforts, our consumer care teams do try, guys. They ask a lot of questions, they reach out, they kind of reach back out again to try to get as much information as possible. So warranty claims. A manufacturer need not file a report for warranty claims or consumer complaints when, during the reporting quarter, no warranty or goodwill adjustments were made or consumer complaints received. That one doesn't happen often. The system component allegedly involved cannot be identified within the reporting system, or the claim fails to provide the minimal specificity as we mentioned a minute ago. For these purposes of aggregate reporting, completing the report template, warranty claims are combined with consumer complaints at that point. So it kind of gets lumped back into that bucket of, we've got all these complaints and calls, we weren't able to verify them. We didn't take any action on them because there was nothing else we could do. We tried to chase it down, but we couldn't get to a solution there. Field reports are slightly different in that field reports are products that the manufacturers ask to bring back in for inspection, whether it by the quality team, engineering team, or both in some cases. They may work together to take a look at the product. Many times this will begin with a consumer complaint, but it may not necessarily, depending on what we're looking at. Product typically brought back in for inspection, as we said, by either quality teams or engineering. And the reason for this is we're looking to verify if the complaint is legitimate or not. If someone's complaining about something, we want to take a look at the product because hands-on is the best way to verify if that complaint is legitimate or not. Want to compare to other similar cases in the system. So have we seen this particular complaint before? Has this come in, or is this the first time that we've heard of this particular complaint? Other things that have to be reported on again are claims on notices of death or injury. So these are different than consumer complaints. So a claim requests for equitable relief from a motor vehicle collision or the failure of a car seat component. Claim exists regardless whether it was denied or refused to pay, or whether it has been settled in the manufacturer's favor. So if a claim was filed, it's reported. Even if the consumer does not reach out, but public information is shared, it has to be included in the report. So if we come across a news report and a specific manufacturer's car seat was cited in it, that has to be included in the reporting that we submit to NHTSA. So even if it's on the news and nobody contacted us and we're made aware of it, we have to include it in our reports. So I think the message so far that everyone can take away from this is that it's real hard for manufacturers to not provide information to NHTSA because we are required to do so in so many different ways. As you can see here, even if it's mentioned on the news, we have to find a way to get as much information as possible and submit it to NHTSA. So what does this recall process actually look like? And everybody makes fun of process because I'm Canadian. You guys say process, that's fine. It's cold up here, so leave me alone. It's really chilly today. So how does this initiate? We're going to talk about manufacturer versus NHTSA and voluntary versus involuntary. How long does it typically take? What are the manufacturers doing? What or is not recall worthy? Reporting to customer service and stuff like this. So how does this all start? So as we mentioned, both manufacturers and NHTSA are doing ongoing testing. So regular testing is happening on both ends. Manufacturers are doing their thing, NHTSA is doing their market surveillance as well. On the manufacturer side, if a compliance test is a fail, we're going to go back and retest that multiple times. The one thing that is to note here is that one failed test is reportable. So if we're out in the lab and we're doing this test and we see this weird result, we can't explain it, we're going to rerun that particular mode multiple times. As we said earlier, crash testing is imperfect. It's meant to be repeatable, but it's not always repeatable. So some things happen and we're going to try to figure out why. Now, if I've got 9 reports saying that the chest Gs were at 51, just as a random example, and I have one report at 64, I'm probably going to lean on the 51 as being accurate, but we're still going to report this one to say, hey, this is what happened. NHTSA may ask for additional tests. And that's fine. We're going to go back and continue to test because we want to see what's happened and try to figure out why. The reality is, as much as all the equipment is meant to be repeatable, the setup, everything happens in a specific way, human error does occur from time to time. There is variation we see in testing depending on who's setting up the seat on the test bench. So all of these things can change a little bit. So if an issue is found, as we said, manufacturers have to report it. No choice. NHTSA is going through their compliance surveillance testing. The Office of Defect Investigation will happily get in touch with manufacturers if they come across something. And as we mentioned earlier, NHTSA doesn't do the testing themselves. They have contracts with outside labs, but they get the reports and make decisions on what they go from there. So what happens next? So NHTSA communication, for example, if during their evaluation they find a failure, they're going to begin a dialogue between the brand and the agency. So formal communication, specific paperwork is exchanged. They're going to ask a number of questions. They're probably going to ask for a whole bunch of test reports. So manufacturers are going to go back into their databases. We're going to find testing. We're going to review a bunch of reports. And we're going to start looking at problem solving. Is this something legitimate? Have we seen this before? Where is this coming from? We're going to be following quality processes as well as NHTSA reporting processes to make sure that everything has been submitted that should have been up till now. If you want to get in trouble real fast, have a failed test report and find out that you hadn't submitted information last quarter when you were supposed to. So the next step is the brand is going to propose a resolution. Well, NHTSA found the problem, but it's not up to them to come up with a solution. You got to come up with a solution as the brand. So the brand will say, this is what we think is the right path for this particular issue. NHTSA is either going to approve or deny it. They may say, yep, we agree, let's continue along, or they're going to say, nope, go back, try again, and come up with another solution for us. Communication now will begin between the two parties, and agreement will begin on what that's going to look like. Typically, when you look at recalls, they are worded strikingly similar from one to the other, and that's for a reason, because there is specific wording to try to get people's attention to understand that there's an issue. This is also at the point where it's decided, is this a recall or is it not a recall? as we talked early on, there was that minor discrepancy between the wording on the notice and the website, how it was a little bit different for Nuna, so they just had to agree they were going to change it on a running basis and make it all align. That might be the solution depending on what it is. If it's a more serious issue, then a recall would be initiated because of safety. So in this particular case now, NHTSA and brand are going to agree on the communication and the scope. There's a couple of different pieces here. A voluntary recall means that it's primarily driven by the brand. So the brand has agreed, there's an issue, we want to conduct a recall, we want to take the right steps and get this fixed. Involuntary recall means that the brand may or may not, probably doesn't agree with it, but NHTSA is driving it saying, nope, you have to do a recall because we feel this is a safety issue, and you have to move forward as such at that point. So let's take a look at some of the voluntary versus involuntary recalls. And we like to throw ourselves under the bus at Graco. So years ago, many of you may remember our lovely buckle recall that happened. Many of you got a lot of free seats because of that recall. And that started because there was some buckle issues that were found, and Graco did not report it in a timely enough fashion. Ultimately, they didn't necessarily agree with the evaluation and were forced into an involuntary recall. The problem with involuntary recalls is it comes with additional consequences, mainly financial. So there's a fine levied. There are consumer notification implications as well that would state along the lines of this recall was initiated by NHTSA, not the manufacturer. Now, if we look at the SureRide label recall that Evenflow did, there was an obligation to notify even though the situation had already been addressed. This particular recall was done off of one complaint. So this was a one-seat recall. So NHTSA said no additional action needed. Evenflow had already done everything they had to do to put it together. You can tell Sarah Havestick put this slide together. Thanks for that, Sarah. Consent orders. So we mentioned that there are financial penalties if you don't take the correct actions, or NHTSA feels you haven't taken the correct actions, or if you haven't done things quickly enough. So back in November of last year, NHTSA ordered the second largest civil penalty they've ever levied of $165 million against Ford because they had not taken action quickly enough, in NHTSA's opinion, for some backup camera issues that they were having. Now, not only did they get hit by the $165 million penalty, they were also told by NHTSA to go back and look at every recall they've ever done, and they dug into every single one of them as follow-ups, how many people were contacted. There's a lot of additional things that came out of this particular penalty. $165 million will typically get anyone's attention. Manufacturers obviously do not want to pay these types of penalties. So it's in everyone's best interest to work with NHTSA, ensure that what needs to be done is done in the correct timeframes. So a couple of other potential recall versus no recall. Label failure from a lab test, for example. So there would be no recall in this initial one where the instruction registration page did not match the URL on the labels. That's something that could be a running change as we talked about. Label failure from lab testing, there are some different ones that can exist. So if there was missing information on the label, and then you would need to update it. So you may get a replacement label sent to you. A couple of other recall examples that were out there, and it depends on what the situation is. So for this particular one with Britax, the car seat could still be used. This was a chest clip, and you could continue to use and monitor. So all registered users will automatically receive a free remedy kit. The kits contained step-by-step instructions and a replacement chest clip made from a different material that improves the durability of the tab. Until you received your replacement, in this case back in 2017, you could continue to safely use the car seat as long as you remove your current chest clip or monitor the center tab of the chest clip for signs of breakage. So that was that particular recall. It was going to take some time. I think it's very important to also remember for everybody that when a recall is initiated, it takes time to get all the pieces in place. So there has to be communication. New products or replacement parts have to be brought in, and that can take time because the majority of manufacturing is done in other countries. This one was a little bit more stern in the wording. If you remember the Kitty World seat from a few years ago, owners were told to stop using the seat immediately. You would receive a full refund as part of the recall program. So again, depending on what the situation is and what the particular issue is, the wording can be a little bit different. Recall retention. So if you go on manufacturers' websites, you're going to find any recall they've initiated over the years listed, under their sections for recalls. All manufacturers have them. You can go on, click on the links, get all the information about what the recalls look like. So even if it's going back multiple years, these are still listed on the website so that people can go back and look at them. As a minimum, um, car seats, for example, will stay on websites until at least the expiry date of all the products. So if the last one was manufactured in 2014 as an example, and it had a 10-year expiry date, it would stay on until at least the end of 2024 to make sure that the useful life of that seat has been exhausted before it would come off a recall list. So what can we take away from all of this information that we've thrown at you guys in about 40 minutes here? Number one is the importance of registration cards. We know as technicians and instructors, you guys understand how important they are. Consumers do not. And registration rates are very low, less than 10% in most cases. There are some new requirements. People are continually trying to find a way to up registration rates and try to get more people to do it. You see the prepaid card here on the screen as an example of one that's provided with all car seats. The problem that we're seeing in a lot of cases with prepaid registration cards is that people are concerned about their personal information. So they are actually shoving these in envelopes and then dropping them in the mail so that people can't look at the card. I guess they're concerned about it. Oddly, they tend to put a return address label on the envelope, so you still have your personal information exposed, but they're trying, I guess. To help ease consumers' minds, also help to remind them that manufacturers cannot use this information to try to spam them and sell them more product. You can't go out and try to do different actions and use this in a marketing capacity. These are strictly to notify consumers if there is a recall. There are more and more ways people can register their car seats now, including QR codes in a lot of cases, or you can do it directly on the manufacturer's website in many cases. If you have an issue with your car seat, your quickest, fastest resolution and solution, contact customer service for the manufacturer. Why? Because it's going to get reported to NHTSA one way or the other. Weekend or after hours, all of us advocates are crazy that way. Reach out to us. You can talk to us. There's information. Majority of us monitor our phones all the time because we don't have a life anyway. So we're happy to answer questions or try to get you resolutions as quickly as possible. New product launches, again, we try to keep a track on everything. Every issue is not a potential recall. And that's one of the big things we want to make sure people understand, that a lot of these things are just simply customer satisfaction. So if a car seat is recalled, number one, don't panic. We don't have to say that to the techs and instructors here, but parents and caregivers tend to be worried because obviously this is the safety device that's protecting their children. Read the recall notification very, very clearly, and we'll talk to that just a second. Guide the consumer with information on how to contact customer service for their resolution. So help them get to the consumer care line so that we can get a resolution for them as quickly as possible. And this one we really can't stress enough, and that is the date range and not just the model number. So if you have a particular car seat that is recalled, it does not mean that every car seat under that name that's ever been manufactured has been recalled. That might be the case in some instances, but not necessarily in the majority. What is really important here is the date of manufacturing. So included in the recall notification will be, in the majority of cases, the specific date range of the seats affected by this recall. So we're not just looking at manufacturers' names or the model name of the seat or the model number. The date range is hugely important to make sure that it's understood which seats are impacted. And that, my friends, is all we have for you today.
All right, I'm going to share a couple more slides and then we do have a couple of questions. Let's see here, hold on. Well, I'll go ahead and read the first question while I'm working on the share. Oh no, I'm
Nice
not that
multitasking,
talented. I
Heather.
can't do that. Never mind. Okay, there we go. When you say, this is a question from Amanda, when you say even if it's in the news, does that include social media story posts?
Yes. And again, these are things that we would then have to go out and validate. Not everything on social can be trusted, as I think we all understand and know. But if it is something that has been reported out there in the broad world, then yes, it would have to be included.
Excellent. A question from Lissa. Do recall listings stay active for a certain amount of time after the last production of a seat's expiration date? So for example, the last car seat of a certain line expires in 2025. Will the recall notice stay active, 2026 and beyond?
Yes. So the last one will stay. It'll typically last. Majority of manufacturers don't remove them from their websites, but you would look at least 10 years from the date of the last production run. So it's going to be up there for quite a while.
Excellent. We have an international question. Good afternoon. The South American market, speaking of Chile, Brazil, and Argentina, is growing. We have witnessed these last 5 years. How can we ask manufacturers to have registration options for the region?
And that's a tricky one. The challenge for a lot of these is that internationally we tend to work through distributors in a lot of cases, and some cases the hands are tied. So there are efforts made in communications with distributors to try to do so. But if the regulations don't allow in some countries, or if they're not specific that they have to do it, then it's very difficult to make them do it, so to speak. So it's an ongoing push, and the advocacy of everyone helps when you're pushing governments or new regulations in place to try to help with that as well.
Thank you so much. Those are all the questions in the box, but I'm going to give folks another moment to type in a question if they had one. Thank you to you, James. This is the second time I've watched this presentation and I learned more this time, so appreciate that. And we do have a few closing announcements. So we hope that you're enjoying this National Child Passenger Safety Board webinar series. We really are enjoying delivering them. We hope you will join us in February for another CEU webinar. Visit cpsboard.org/webinars to register, or you can scan this QR code here on your screen. Great news for all of our CPSTIs and instructor candidates attending. If you earned your hybrid endorsement with the 2020 curriculum, the instructors will now have access to the 2024 CPST hybrid certification training in the Child Passenger Safety Learning Portal. If you are not yet hybrid endorsed and you would like to earn the endorsement, email your name and instructor number to training@cpsboard.org and you will be given access to the new curriculum. Visit cpsboard.org/webinars to register or scan this QR code here on your screen. I did have one other question pop up. James, if you don't mind, why does Canada have so many restrictions on car seats made here in the US?
Well, we're picky in Canada. The simplest explanation of that is that the testing requirements and regulations are very different. So, for example, in Canada, there's a rebound requirement that does not exist in the US. So, you may see different features on different seats because of that. And it also cuts down the availability of some seats available in Canada that are available in the US. So, it kind of crosses both ways where it may restrict some seats from the US, but it also restricts seats coming into Canada where there's not as much availability.
Excellent. I have a few more questions popping up. Let me finish this last page. For those who are done, we will stop the recording, and then if there are more questions, we have a minute to answer those. So this webinar recording will be posted to carseateducation.org within 1 to 2 days. For the child passenger safety technicians in attendance, the presentation qualifies for 1 CEU. Proof of attendance will be emailed 24 hours after the webinar. If by some chance you don't get that email from Zoom, you can email secretariat@cpsboard.org. You must enter your own webinar information in your profile at cert.safekids.org to receive the CEU for recertification. All the information you need for your profile will be found in the email you receive from Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a safe day, and thank you for all you do to help keep child passengers and their families safe. Kendra, if you wanted to go ahead and stop the recording, and then I see a couple questions that I can type answers